Okay, hello, good afternoon. Sir Gian here. Welcome to our Module 4 of Science, Technology, and Society titled Intellectual Revolutions. This is your professor, Mr. Gian Del and Atalia. So, initial question first. Have you wondered, has human intelligence truly improved over the centuries? Or is it just a different style? Have we improved in the way we think? Or is it just changed versions? So with that, our lesson objectives are now here being viewed and being put on the screen. So let's begin with the concept of intellectual revolution. Intellectual revolution refers to the series of events that led to the emergence of science, modern science specifically, and the progress of scientific thinking across critical periods in history. So a person may be smart, a person may be above average in thinking, but it also is a special factor, an important factor on how he thinks. So therefore, we can describe humanity in which we improved our way of thinking, not just our capacity to think. So those are two different things. Our way of thinking is different from our ability to think. And there are three intellectual revolutions that improved the way we think about the universe, ourselves, and our environment. So let's begin with the Copernican revolution. During the 16th century, if you're not familiar with this face, this is the portrait of Nicholas Copernicus. Before Copernicus, there was the geocentric model, in which many believe that the Earth is at the center of the universe and all the celestial objects, all the heavenly bodies, are actually just revolving around it. It was started by Claudius Ptolemy and has been a popular belief even by religious people since then. But Nicholas Copernicus, during the 16th century, stated, 16th century, stated that the center of the solar system, according to his calculations, is not actually the Earth, but actually the Sun. So, with his model, Copernicus outlined two ideas. That the Venus and Mercury are actually revolving sun, because they are closer to the Sun rather than closer to the Earth. And Mars, Saturn, and Jupiter lay outside the Earth's orbit, and they are revolving not on the Earth but on a farther orbit on the Sun. So that's the heliocentric model. Another supporter of the heliocentric model was actually Galilei. With his telescopes, he discovered Jupiter's moons. If you're not familiar with Jupiter's moons, those are Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto. So those four moons of Jupiter actually proved that those moons are revolving around Jupiter. So therefore, Earth isn't at the center. If other celestial objects are revolving around Jupiter, so other celestial objects must not be revolving around Earth. Therefore, the heliocentric model is now proven to be true instead of geocentric. So the next revolution we will discuss is about the Darwinian evolution or Darwinian revolution. So before Darwin, ideas about evolution existed, but there's a lack of idea regarding how organisms improved or changed over time. It was John Baptist Lamarck that had an idea about Lamarckism, or theory of inheritance of acquired characteristics. So he thought that through use and disuse, organisms develop strengthened traits that they use frequently. For example, the length of the neck of giraffes was actually due to their improved use over time because of use, while unused traits weaken or disappear, such as, for example, the wings of some other birds that have begun to walk and live on the ground rather than on trees. So this is a good example Another idea is that the traits develop during an organism's lifetime. So for example, for human beings, having good muscle genetics or improved muscle definition, being muscular, can be passed on to the offspring. But however, Charles Darwin had a different observation. His adventures on the Beagle was the name of the ship that he actually rode on Galapagos Island. So he studied Galapagos Island and published there his observations called the origin of species. What he thought is that populations pass through a process of natural selection in which the environment will select organisms or genes that the fittest or that can adapt to the changes of the environment. Darwin's points of natural selection can be summarized as different birds or organisms have different variations of genes. Some birds can have thicker beaks and some can have smaller beaks, but the inheritance of those traits can vary as well. So, if some birds here are able to thrive with bigger beaks, nature favors that over the smaller beaks. So, differential survival and reproduction where individuals with favorable traits are more likely to survive and pass those traits on. The reason why we don't see chicken or ducks with bigger beaks is that the smaller beaks of chicken or fowl or ducks have been favored by the environment. This process results in organisms better adapted to their environment over time. So the four principles of natural selection can be summarized as these. Overproduction means if you have more offspring than normal or more offspring as you can produce, it will be to your benefit because some of them will survive and pass on those traits. Variation means that in a population, there can be differences in the traits of organisms. It can be random due to generic or genetic variations. So some fishes can have different colors, some birds can have different sizes of beaks, and we human beings can have different colors of eyes, different colors of hair, and physical features. And that is true. And adaptation means that from those variations, we use those traits to make us be able to survive. So for example, human beings have that variation of being social animals, meaning we can make societies, we can make friends with other human beings. We are able to adapt because of that. So other animals are not being able to communicate, and that is not to their advantage. But some animals, if they cannot be able to communicate, they have other adaptation tactics which they can use. For example, the existence of venom, being physically strong, being able to camouflage. A lot of adaptation traits are within different species. And lastly, from those variations, from those adaptations, what we can do is for the nature or for the environment to select or to make survive the organisms with beneficial adaptation. So for example, this darker colored fish compared to this lighter colored fish, the environment they can fit in their environment, which one will survive or not. So those are principles of natural selection. Before, what we just thought on the evolution of species is just to improve it over time. But we have not thought that mutation is possible as well. Okay, there can be differences in the expressions, and that is normal and random. And the interesting point here is that this is the time when we understood that it's the environment that chooses the survival of organisms and not by the species determination. So let's proceed now to the Freudian revolution. So it's pronounced as Freud. Okay? Before Sigmund Freud, the study of the mind or psychology was more on philosophical stages, in which they always ask, in which is it going to be the environment, or is it going to be, the inner or the innate characteristics of a person when he was born that is going to be the basis of his behavior, of his character. So with that, it was more on philosophical, and it was more on asking questions. And to be honest, there are other superstitions in which the people believe, our behavior, our minds, our character can be developed or remedied. Some other people thought that when you are panicking, it's actually a disease, and they call it hysterics. So hysterics, they call it that way. So the process or the study of the human behavior developed into more scientific endeavors when this person, Sigmund Freud, an Austrian neurologist, found psychoanalysis, in which he states that our mind is composed of different parts that think differently. So he called that the unconscious mind. He believed that the mind was composed of conflicting elements. We can be able to think of non-acceptable ideas, we can be able to think of what we believe is good, and we can mediate in between. So he called that id, ego, and the superego. The id has something to do with our impulses, our instincts, our intrusive thoughts. It's the part of the psyche of a person that operates based on the pleasure. What do you want to do? What do you desire? What do you want to do right now without any repercussions, without any consequences? Basically, younger people tend to have more id. They tend to think only for themselves and only for the sake of pleasure or reward or gratifying. Now, as we age up, we develop our ego, in which it operates on the reality. It seeks to meditate between the id and what we call here the superego. So the superego here is our sense of morality, our sense of compassion, our sense of obedience towards society and its standards. So if id here has something to do with what you want, superego here has something to do with what society wants, or what does your family want, what do other people want. And it's not inherently good nor evil. It just has something to do with ethical standards and often striving for doing what you believe is perfect, alright? Now, what's in between them is called the ego. The ego is the mediator, in which he seeks, or this part seeks, to meet the standards of the superego, the morality part of your mind, versus the id, which is the pleasure-seeking part of your mind. So the ego is personally you, okay? You choosing to balance between your id, the desires of the id, and the moral standards of your superego. So we do that all the time. When we make decisions, of course, our decisions have something to do with what is acceptable to society, superego, and what do we want as well, which is the id. Nothing is purely id nor superego. There has to be some sort of compromise and balance between the two. So with that idea, with those ideas, people have thought that, people have different ways of thinking. And that started the modern approach to psychoanalysis, in which every word, every dreams that we have can be studied and analyzed, and we can see patterns. And while Sigmund Freud cannot be called a perfect theory, or his theory cannot be called perfect, nor he is a perfect psychoanalyst or psychiatrist, he paved the way for other foundations of psychology to begin, to analyze and have a scientific process of analyzing the human condition, the human behavior. Now, let's proceed. Why is it that most of the intellectual ideas were controversial at first? So let's say, for example, Copernicus's idea was firstly met with resistance. People didn't like the concept of heliocentric. It was weird and strange. The concept of Darwin's evolution. A lot of people even think up to now that, that meme regarding the chimpanzees, the monkeys evolving into human beings, that idea is wrong. No, Darwin didn't say any of that. So they were controversial even up to now. Now, they were controversial because they were different. But their being different has nothing to do with them being correct. So therefore, scientific revolutions have done things to our ways of thinking up to now, in which they were different at first, they were radical, but it was proven for them to be more effective and more truthful than the previous systems of thinking. Darwin's theory of evolution was more efficient, was more effective, and more prevalent. It was more observable than the previous theory. Freud's ideas were better accepted because they work, versus those old school techniques of philosophy. So with that, that's the idea about number one. Do you think we can live in a society even without these revolutionary intellectuals or without these revolutions? Actually, yes. But the problem is that what would happen to our line of thinking if those revolutions did not happen? Would we still believe in superstitions? Would we still believe in baseless ideas, baseless facts, and accept them as if they're true? So with that, aside from intellectual revolutions, there also happen to be intellectual revolutions in different parts of the world. And how they invented, they developed their own sciences. Let's begin with Meso-America. So when you say Meso-America, it means Middle America, from Mexico towards down to Honduras and El Salvador. Now, let's proceed with Maya first. Mayans, or the Mayan civilization during that time, were known to be astronomers. They had an idea of moons, planets, even comets. And the Mayan calendar is one they used for measuring time. It was used for farmers, when to sow seeds, when to plant seeds, when to harvest. And another calendar that they had, Zolkin, is also for religious and ceremonial purposes. They believed that it was the beginning of something within the gods. Now, let me proceed. Let me move to the other slide. Okay. Mayans were also mathematicians. They developed a number system in which it's based on number 20. They also have a concept of zero. Now, for the Inca civilization, they had an idea of suspension bridges. This was one of the first suspension bridges. And Quipu, was tied knots, in which they used them for messaging and symbolism. It was a mode of communication. Unfortunately, we cannot fully interpret what they mean. But the idea is that they had their own way of storing information through Quipu. So this one is Quipu. And not to mention that they also had outstanding architectural projects. So for the Aztec civilization, they had the idea of chocolates, being put in a drink. Believe it or not, it was mixed with chili. It was mixed with sile. They put it in water, put it with chili, and they drink it in a bitter and spicy flavor. They also created the calendar and the invention of small boats called canoe. Now, in Asia, we also had developments of our scientific progress. So, with that, let's proceed with India. India had their heydays or progress in mathematics, especially trigonometry and algebra. They created algorithms algorithms are systems or equations in which they will use it to further calculate some other problems. It was Aryabhatiya that started it. Brahmagupta, even before Newton, suggested was gravity was actually an attracting force. Okay, it was before Newton. Now, for China, what they invented was actually a very important one: compass. It was used by navigators for finding their way, along with other navigation tools. But compass is actually an essential part. It also invented its tools. It also invented traditional medicine using their own endemic plants. And of course, the first printing tool was in China. Now, in Middle East, what's cool with this is that there was a golden age of Islamic science in which a lot of Muslim scholars studied light, glasses, chemistry, and even medicine. So let's begin with astronomy as well. So they even invented the word algebra. Okay, not just astronomy. They invented the word algebra. It came from the word aljabar, means to put together. When you're solving algebraic equations, you're putting together x, diba? When you say find x or compute for x, you're putting together the numbers and the variables there. They've had the first camera, the first camera or camera obscura. And all you see here, the astrolabe, the compasses, were actually their own inventions in order to study the stars and navigation. Okay, they were also leaders in geometry, making metals, and of course, astronomy and mathematics. Now, what's happening right now is not just the information revolution, but also the digital revolution. Okay, and we have discussed this one last module. So that's it for our discussion. But what's important here is that we studied the three revolutions in the scientific society. So what were the scientific revolutions again? Let's go back and view them one by one. So first, the Copernican revolution. Understanding that our universe is not centered on Earth, that Earth is just a part of it. The Darwinian revolution is when we understood that living things change over time in a random manner. But it is the environment that selects which one survives, not depending on which one adjusts or adapts to the environment. And lastly, Freudian revolution had an idea that our thoughts, what we think and what we do, are affected by different ways of thinking, the unconscious mind. And our actions and thoughts right now are actually shaped by our experiences as well. So these are the three industrial revolutions. You can now continue with your worksheet number 2, and the topics there in worksheet number 2 are about week number 3 and week number 4. Thank you, and I'll see you guys next time.